The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 times as Alexander Donovan climbed the stairs to his bedroom, his footsteps muffled by the thick Persian carpet. The house felt enormous around him, each room a testament to his success but also to the growing distance between him and the woman he had married 3 years ago. At the top of the stairs, he paused outside the master bedroom door. Light still glowed beneath it, which meant Elena was probably reading, as she did most nights. They had fallen into this routine so gradually that he couldn't pinpoint exactly when it had started, him working late in his study, her retreating to their bedroom with a book, both of them avoiding the awkward dance of two people sharing a space but not a life. Alexander pushed open the door quietly. Elena sat propped against the headboard, her dark hair falling in waves over her shoulders, a novel open in her lap. She looked up when he entered, offering the same polite smile she had been giving him for months. "How was your day?" she asked, closing the book and placing it on the nightstand. The question was automatic, part of the careful choreography they had developed to maintain the appearance of normalcy. "Long," Alexander replied, loosening his tie. "The Singapore deal is more complicated than we anticipated." Elena nodded, already turning away to fluff her pillow. "I'm sure you'll figure it out. You always do." Once, her confidence in him had thrilled him. Now it felt like one more wall between them. Another reminder of how he had let his work consume everything, including his marriage. Alexander went through his nightly routine shower, changing into pajamas, brushing his teeth while Elena settled under the covers on her side of their king-sized bed. By the time he slipped under the sheets, she had already turned off her bedside lamp and was facing away from him. "Good night," she whispered into the darkness. "Good night," he replied, staring at the ceiling and listening to her breathing, gradually slow and deepen. This was how it had been for 3 years. Polite conversations, careful distance, and an ocean of unspoken hurt that seemed to grow wider each day. They lived like courteous strangers, sharing a house but not a marriage, sleeping in the same bed but worlds apart. It hadn't always been this way. Alexander remembered their wedding day, how Elena had looked at him with such love and hope, how she had whispered promises about building a life together that would be extraordinary. He remembered the first months of their marriage, when she would wait up for him no matter how late he worked, when they would talk for hours about their dreams and plans. But somewhere along the way, those conversations had grown shorter and less frequent. Elena had stopped waiting up. She had stopped asking about his day with genuine curiosity, and he had stopped sharing the parts of his life that really mattered. Work had become his refuge, the place where he felt competent and successful, while home had become a place of careful politeness and growing regret. The breaking point had come 8 months ago, during what should have been a romantic anniversary dinner. Elena had dressed beautifully, made reservations at their favorite restaurant, and Alexander had arrived 2 hours late because of a crisis at the office. He had found her sitting alone at the table, her meal cold, her eyes red from crying. "I can't do this anymore," she had said quietly when he sat down, full of apologies and explanations. "I feel like I'm married to a ghost." That night, she had moved into the guest bedroom. They had maintained the fiction that it was temporary, that she just needed space to think, but temporary had stretched into months. They still shared meals, occasionally still attended social functions together, still presented a united front to the world. But the intimacy, the connection, the simple pleasure of each other's company, all of that had withered away. Now, lying in the darkness listening to his wife's breathing, Alexander felt the weight of all his mistakes pressing down on him. Tomorrow was Elena's birthday, and he had made the same arrangements he made every year: expensive flowers delivered to her office, dinner reservations at an upscale restaurant, a piece of jewelry that cost more than most people's cars but required no thought or personal investment. But tonight, something was different. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him when he came home, a flash of something in her eyes that reminded him of the woman he had fallen in love with. Maybe it was the realization that he had been so focused on building an empire that he had forgotten to build a marriage. Or maybe it was simply that he couldn't bear the thought of losing her completely. Alexander sat up in bed, his decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. For 3 years, he had been passive in his own marriage, letting distance grow and intimacy die through neglect and indifference. But Elena was still here. She hadn't left, hadn't filed for divorce, hadn't given up entirely. That had to mean something. He slipped out of bed quietly and made his way downstairs to his study. If he was going to reclaim his wife, he needed to start by reclaiming himself, the man who had pursued her with such determination, who had convinced her to take a chance on love with someone whose world was so different from hers. Elena Martinez had been a high school teacher when they met, passionate about education and completely unimpressed by his wealth. She had challenged him, made him think about things beyond profit margins and market shares. She had seen something in him that he had almost forgotten existed, a capacity for tenderness, for putting someone else's needs before his own. Alexander pulled out a legal pad and began to write. Not a business plan or a contract, but a letter to his wife. He wrote about how he had fallen in love with her laugh, how she had made him want to be a better man, how somewhere along the way he had lost sight of what really mattered. He wrote about his regrets, his fears, and his hope that it wasn't too late to find their way back to each other. When he finished writing, dawn was breaking over the city. Alexander folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. Then he picked up his phone and began making calls. By the time Elena came down for breakfast, Alexander had already left for the office. But instead of the usual rushed note about his schedule, she found a single white rose on the kitchen table with a card that read, "The first of many." At her school, Elena was surprised to find not the usual elaborate floral arrangement, but a small potted plant. A jasmine bush, the same kind that had been blooming outside the cafe where they had their first date. The note attached said, "Some things are worth growing slowly." Elena stared at the plant, confusion and something that might have been hope warring in her chest. Alexander hadn't referenced their early relationship in years. She had assumed he had forgotten those details, that they had been erased by spreadsheets and conference calls. That afternoon, she received a text from Alexander. "Cancel our dinner reservation. I have something else in mind. Trust me." Elena hesitated before responding. Trust had become a foreign concept in their marriage, replaced by predictability and disappointment. But something in his message, some echo of the man who had once surprised her with picnics in the park and midnight drives to watch the sunrise, made her tie back. Okay. When Elena arrived home that evening, she found the house transformed. Candles flickered in every window, and the sound of soft music drifted from the living room. Alexander stood in the doorway, wearing not his usual business suit but the casual clothes she remembered from their dating days. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "An apology," Alexander said, stepping closer. "And a beginning. If you'll let it be." He led her to the living room, where he had recreated their first date as closely as possible. The coffee table was set with takeout from the little cafe where they had met, the same menu items they had shared while talking until the restaurant closed around them. Photos from their courtship and early marriage were scattered across the table, evidence of a happiness that felt like it belonged to other people. "I know I don't deserve this," Alexander said as they sat down together on the couch. "I know I've been a terrible husband, that I've let work become more important than us. But Elena, I want to fight for this marriage. I want to fight for you." Elena picked up one of the photographs, their wedding day, both of them, laughing at something the photographer had said. "I don't even know if we remember how to be married to each other," she said softly. "Then we'll learn again," Alexander replied. "We'll start over. As many times as it takes. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust again. To earn the right to be your husband instead of just a man you happen to live with." He pulled out the letter he had written, his hands trembling slightly as he handed it to her. "I wrote this for you. Everything I should have said months ago, years ago." Elena read the letter in silence, tears sliding down her cheeks as she absorbed his words. When she finished, she looked up at him with eyes that held both pain and possibility. "I've been so lonely," she whispered. "Even when you're here, I've been so lonely." "I know," Alexander said, reaching out to touch her face gently. "I've been lonely too. I just didn't know how to find my way back to you." They talked that night until dawn. Really talked for the first time in years. They spoke about their hurt, their fears, their dreams that had gotten buried under routine and indifference. Alexander told her about the pressure he felt to constantly succeed, how he had used work as a shield against the vulnerability that love required. Elena spoke about feeling invisible in her own marriage, about the slow erosion of hope that had left her feeling like a stranger in her own life. As the sun rose over the city, Alexander took his wife's hand and asked a question that would determine their future. "Will you let me love you again? Will you let me learn how to be the husband you deserve?" Elena looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, seeing for the first time in years the man she had fallen in love with. "Yes," she said simply, "but we do this right. We start over completely. We court each other again. We learn to be friends again. We rebuild trust. And Alexander, your phone stays downstairs after 8 o'clock." Every night, Alexander smiled. The first genuine smile Elena had seen from him in months. "Deal," he said. "Whatever it takes." The road back to intimacy would be long and sometimes difficult. But that morning, as they sat together watching the sunrise, both of them knew that their marriage was worth fighting for. Love, they had learned, wasn't just a feeling, it was a choice, made new each day. And finally, they were both ready to choose each other.